Ladies and gentlemen, we have got ourselves a 7-seater hybrid. It's called the Nissan X-Trail. Now, prices start from £32,000, but if you want the electrified models, in other words, e-power technology, prices start from roughly £36,000. Now, in this review, we'll be comparing it to some of the rival alternatives and to see if it's actually worth its price tag. Now, to kick off, I would like to point out that there are a whopping 22 variations of the Nissan X-Trail, if not potentially more. There is front-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, e-power, mild hybrid, and also 5- and 7-seater options. Now, just to confuse things a little bit more, if you want e-power technology in a 7-seater, you'll have to go for a four-wheel drive vehicle, whereas in the mild hybrid, you can go for a front-wheel drive 7-seater. I'm not really sure why either. Now, what is all this e-power technology about, and is it something that you should consider when making a purchasing decision, for example, going for the X-Trail's different trim levels? Well, here e-power is effectively a means of driving with that EV experience at all times. You're not going to be limited by a battery pack or indeed in terms of electric range, and you're always going to get that sort of seamless transition when it comes to putting your foot down to the metal, and you're not going to have to worry about any sort of transition between the engine or indeed electric motors. So how does it actually work? Well, the front-mounted 1.5 litre turbocharged engine is disconnected from the drivetrain, and it is effectively constantly charging a small-sized battery pack, which in turn provides power to the motor or motors, depending on if you go for the front-wheel drive or four-wheel drive models, and therefore gives you that EV driving experience. Now, what does this all translate to? Well, from my own mixed driving test, I noted 42.6 miles per gallon, which is actually not too far off the manufacturer's 44 mile per gallon claim. It's actually quite refreshing to see a manufacturer not grossly lying or indeed overinflating its figures. However, in comparison to rival alternatives, the X-Trail isn't exactly all that impressive. See, you've got the likes of, for example, the Honda HR-V hitting north of 50 miles per gallon, while the likes of a plug-in hybrid such as the Citroen C5X hitting over 60 to 70 miles per gallon. Now, this will of course depend on how you're driving and where you're driving, but I will be very surprised if you can hit over 45 miles per gallon in the Nissan X-Trail e-Power. Equally, if you're going to be driving on the motorway, expect this figure to drop to 36 to 39 miles per gallon. Speaking of which, in terms of going the long distances, you will be pleased to know that there is a 55 litre petrol tank, and therefore, depending on how you drive, you might be able to net over 400 miles on a singular sitting without having to effectively stop to refuel. Now, the reason why the vehicle is less efficient while on the motorway is because there is no means of recouping energy back into the battery pack, indeed via means of regenerative braking. Now, right now I'm driving at 20 miles an hour, and if I were to simply lift off the accelerator pedal, I am coasting. Now, I can initiate B mode by shifting down on the gear selector, and you can see here suddenly I start decelerating a lot quicker. However, if I were to go one step further, I can enable e-pedal mode, and this can be done by pressing a button found towards the center console. So right now, yet again, I am driving at 20 miles an hour, and if I were to lift off the accelerator pedal, you can see here that the vehicle decelerates a lot quicker, but will still be crawling, which I find is an unfortunate feature of recent Nissan electrified vehicles. So for example, even the fully electric Ariya does not have the means of driving with one pedal only. And this will be a disappointment to certain individuals out there. For example, for those who are coming from the older Nissan Leaf, you'll know that e-pedal mode used to mean one pedal driving. But alas, that's not the case in the X-Trail e-Power, and therefore means that you'll still have to resort to using the physical brake pedal. Now, while the emission of a singular pedal drive will be a disappointment to certain individuals, such as like myself, the overall performance took me by surprise. Now, indeed, over here there are two electric motors, at least on the e-Power e-Force models, which dispatch 211 horsepower or 157 kilowatts of power. That equates to also 525 newton meters of torque. Now, I had it tested from 0 to 60 miles an hour using Race Logic's Performance Box Touch at 7.01 seconds. So yes, it'll pretty much fly when you put your foot down to the metal. I actually had it tested from 50 to 70 miles an hour at just 3.44 seconds. Very handy when you want to do an overtake maneuver on the motorway. I even recorded a peak of 4.12 Gs. Now, as for its top speed, it is capped at 111 miles an hour, which will certainly suffice for a lot of individuals, although might come as a disappointment to those who live near unrestricted roads. Now, if you're regularly putting your foot down to the metal, you might want to consider getting one of the e-Force models. Not only do they offer you the off-road and snow modes, but they will also give you better traction thanks to a 4-wheel drive configuration up from a 2-wheel drive configuration, and also better stability. The vehicle feels a lot more level while cornering, and indeed that is due to the clever technology that Nissan has integrated. Now, don't get it mistaken that there will still be some body lean present even on the E-Force models, and you won't exactly get that one-to-one driver's feel or indeed connection with the front axle, even in terms of its sport mode preset. And that is simply because of the overall size and indeed class of the vehicle. If that's something that you're looking for, that you might want to consider one of the more sportier SUVs. Now on that note, it brings me on to its suspension system. And quite frankly, I was left disappointed. See here, it deals well with a singular speed bump thanks to its soft setup, but as soon as I was going over roads that were a bit more challenging and therefore had multiple anomalies or, for example, potholes, I felt that the vehicle just felt a bit too jittery and bouncy for my liking. Indeed, in this respect, it's no competition to vehicles that offer an adaptive air suspension system. And yes, granted, it will feel softer than those vehicles that are a bit more sportier and therefore have a bit more of a stiffened setup, but in a grander scheme of things for the vehicle class, I was expecting a little bit better from the Japanese automaker. Now, the vehicle's somewhat unsettled driving experience is quite a shame because the overall cabin noise is kept down to a minimum, even when you're traversing at speed or on even terrain, and also given the fact that the generator can actually barely be heard. Now, as for the overall interior design, Nissan should really be commended. I really love the overall feel and design of the steering wheel. The choice of materials throughout the cabin just make it look a little bit more premium, and don't even get me started in terms of the overall stitching work that's been done in terms of the upholstery. No matter which trim level you go for, I think you'll find that the overall design of the cabin of the X-Trail is certainly impressive. Furthermore, it's absolutely fantastic to see that the manufacturer has retained physical buttons and dials. Indeed, you've got dedicated climate controls, making it very easy to adjust on the fly, buttons found on the steering wheel, which are intuitively laid out, stalks, which are at a good sort of position, and even in terms of the sleek and stylish gear selector, which might not be to everyone's cup of tea, I actually quite like it because it makes it quite easy to switch between drive and reverse, for example, when doing a 3-point turn. Now, better still, when it comes to the use of technology within the cabin, it's not too bad. At least it depends in terms of which trim level you go for. See here, you'll have a part digitalized 7-inch TFT instrument cluster as standard, but in the end connector moves over to a fully digitalized 12.3-inch display. Now, as for the center of the dashboard, you will actually find an omission of a display on the entry-level trim, which is quite surprising in this day and age. Thankfully, however, on all the e-Power models, you will find an 8-inch display with a 6-speaker audio system, and this moves over to a 12.3-inch display on the end connector trims or above. Now, on that note, on the Tecna trim and the Tecna Plus trims, you will also find a 10-speaker Bose system, which we've actually got it reviewed on our dedicated video that can be found up on your pop banner or indeed down in the description below or the pinned comments. What we'll say in a nutshell is that the Bose audio system does add to the overall prowess of the system, but is actually still quite disappointing in comparison to what else you can find out there in the market. Now, in terms of what other things that you will get with the Tecna trims, you will be pleased to know that you have got a 10.8-inch head-up display, and therefore the projection gives you the slight peace of mind to keep your eyes planted on the road to check, for example, for your traversing speed or indeed the safety systems that are in operation. Our only complaint over here is that Nissan has not integrated navigation support from the third-party operating systems into the instrument cluster nor the head-up display. Now, no matter which trim level you go for, you'll find a handy sunglass compartment, which I actually quite like using, at the front of the cabin. Now, this does actually perfectly bring me onto storage within the cabin. And here, the front door bins are actually pretty large and will accommodate a 500ml bottle with ease alongside a small to medium-sized purse or wallet. The glove compartment, which has not been optimized for right-hand drive vehicles, but nonetheless should suffice for most. And then as for the center console, you have got a wireless charging bay found at the front of it. Further down, you've got 2 cup holders, which alas here have also not been optimized because you have got no means of actually placing, let's say, smaller cups and therefore preventing them from actually falling over. And then further down, you have got this pretty stylish armrest compartment, which reveals an additional bit of storage, therefore allowing you to place, let's say, your sunglass box or, for example, some charging cables. Now, as for the rear of the cabin, the door bins are unsurprisingly a little bit more limited. But if you do want to present a little bit more convenience for your rear occupants, you might want to opt for the Tecna trim or above. above, because this will present a drop-down armrest compartment which reveals 2 cup holders and a little handy area where you can actually place a smartphone. Now, aside from storage within the cabin, we have to of course talk about its boot, and here you have got an electric tailgate that comes fitted as standard in the Techno trims and above, or else it's going to be manually operated. Now, there's a button found just below the number plate, and when I press it, yes, there's a bit of an annoying beep. When I say annoying beep, it means that it's going to happen every single time you open or indeed close the tailgate. And yes, it could be a little bit faster. Come on, come on, come on, come on. Yeah, a bit too slow. So Nissan hopefully can potentially optimize this somehow. I'm not really sure how, but regardless, it would have been great to see that beeping function disabled through the infotainment system, because it can disturb your neighbors, specifically, for example, you're parking at night. Now, nonetheless, when it comes to the overall capacity, it is pretty impressive. Now, the front wheel drive model has got, unsurprisingly, more space, sitting at 575 litres, and with the seats down, 1,396 litres. The four-wheel drive model, which we have on review, has 485 litres and 1,298 litres respectively. Now, apart from that, you have got a 60-40 rear split folding design, and this moves over to a 40-20-40 split in the Techno trims and above, making it a little bit more practical to take elongated goods. On that note, you've also got a flat loading bay, and that is certainly appreciated for a lot of individuals, for example those wanting to take larger size suitcases, or for example if you've got, let's say, a bike. Now, if you go for one of the 7-seater models, you'll find that there's limited amount of storage at the back, of course where all 7 seats are in place, but you can still take 2 carry-ons. It really depends in terms of your overall Tetris skills. Now, as a 1993-1994 2-time champion, and for those people who get the reference, kudos to you, you'll be able to place the removable and retractable bootload cover just behind the 7 seats, and therefore it seems like Nissan has actually thought about that. So for example, if you forgot to leave the bootload cover at home or indeed in the garage and you've picked up someone, then you're still not going to disturb any of your rear occupants. Now, on the subject of its seating configuration, let's talk about actual seating comfort. Now, on all trim levels, you actually find reclining seats, and I'm not actually sure why you'd ever use it in this sort of mode, but just in case you wanted to provide extra legroom for those sat at the back, in other words, in the 7-seater option, you can do so. And here you've got the reclining feature, in other words, you can go pretty much all the way back. Now, this actually does provide for a really comfortable experience, and I absolutely love it. I'm just under 6 foot, I've got no issues when it comes to headroom nor legroom. Of course, legroom does get reduced in the 7-seater option, at least where you're placing the seats at the front, and therefore it's just a worthwhile consideration, at least if you've got adults sat in the second row. Now, as for the 7-seater option at the rear, it will actually suffice for those people who are smaller individuals, and namely here if you've got children. If, however, there are adults sat at the back, you will actually find that the 7-seater option might not actually be a plausible solution for you, because, well, legroom is very limited and so is headroom, to the point where I think it might be actually a bit of a safety concern. Now, with that in mind, Nissan has actually thought about optimizing legroom, because the transmission tunnel is actually kept down to a minimum, which is certainly appreciated for those people sat at the rear middle seat. Now, speaking of which, at the rear portion of the center console, you'll find 2 USB ports. It depends in terms of which trim level you go for, whereby you might find 2 USB Type A ports or a Type C and a Type A port, at least on the more expensive trims. Now, as for the front of the cabin, you've got manually adjustable seats, at least on the entry-level models. If, however, you go for one of the Techno trims, you will find that you've got power memory functions, both for the front seats, heated functionalities, and also heated rear seats. The steering wheel and the windscreen also get the heated treatment. Furthermore, the Techno trim does also add a glass roof and a sunroof, which is certainly appreciated in order to bring in some extra light within the cabin. Now, no matter which trim level you go for, I think you'll really appreciate the seats, which are not only accommodating but also very soft. And yes, that also includes the rear too, in other words, in the 7-seater models. Speaking of which, over here you've got a variety of different configurations that you can opt for the second and third row. Better still, you've also got some cutouts found towards the rear of the cabin, which draw in some extra lights for those 6th and 7th occupants. You've got very large windows for those people sat in the second row, and you've also got these little retractable sunshades, always very handy. However, the only complaint I have is that the rear window, while it does have a one-touch operation, doesn't fully drop down, and therefore those who are sat at the back who might be a little bit shorter won't be able to fully appreciate the scenery. Now, aside from this, I would like to actually commend Nissan for their wide opening rear doors, which makes it very practical when you're loading in and out goods, or for example having people coming in and out of the cabin regularly, or of course if you're going to be regularly installing a child seat. Now, this does perfectly bring me onto its exterior design, and here in the end connector trims or above you'll find a rear privacy glass and also some roof rails. Now as for the exterior look, I've got no complaints whatsoever. Of course, looks are all very subjective, so definitely do share your opinions down in the comment section below. But what I'll say here is that the bubble-shaped design fits with the Nissan's DNA, at least in terms of their recent trend. And then you've also got these headlights which look pretty snazzy. No complaints at the rear either, whereby it fits with the rest of the vehicle's profile. As for the side, you've got 18-inch alloys that come fitted as standard, although this moves over to 19-inch alloys in the Tecna and 20-inch in the Tecna Plus. You have also got these plastic wheel arches and side skirts, which I'm not overly fond of, but given that they don't protrude too much from the vehicle, I've got no inherent complaints. Now in terms of your colour options, it really depends as to which model you choose, but here you've got options from £575 up to £1,265 for a two-tone finish. Now as for your towing capacity, you have got 1,650 kilograms to 1,800 kilograms on a four-wheel drive models, at least with a brake trailer. This moves down to 750 kilograms on an unbrake trailer. It is worth noting, however, that the front-wheel drive models are limited to 670 kilograms for both types of trailers. Now moving swiftly on, we get onto the driver assistance systems, and here Nissan should really be commended by offering a plethora of them as standard across all trim levels. Indeed, there's front emergency brake assist, forward collision monitoring, lane departure warning, blind spot monitoring, traffic sign recognition, rear cross traffic alert, high beam assist, driver attention warning, and even intelligent cruise control, all of which add to the overall experience. Better still, the Tecna trims even add Pro Pilot Assist, which effectively gives you steering support. Of course, you'll still have to keep your attention and your hands on the wheel, but it certainly takes the stress away from those more mundane motorway drives. Now, if you're going to be frequenting busy city centres or going in a parking lot, you'll be pleased to know that this 4.68 metre long vehicle is actually very easy to manoeuvre, and that is in part due to its 11.1 metre turning circle. Now, as for the rear sensors, they come fitted as standard, and the Tecna trim adds side sensors as well. As for your cameras, a rear view camera with a washer comes fitted as standard across all e-Power models, while the end connector trim and above adds a surround view monitoring system, allowing you a good sort of vision around the vehicle. So with all that in mind, it brings us on to our verdict, and quite frankly, Nissan has got an interesting proposition for the hybrid market. See, the X-Trail offers a 7-seater at a relatively affordable price tag. It's also very stylish, both inside and out, and it's also pretty practical thanks to the use of clever technology within the cabin. Then you've also got decent boot space, at least if you're not using all 7 seats. Now, it's worth considering, however, that the overall fuel efficiency is a little bit lackluster. Given the electrification, we would have expected better MPG figures. Aside from this, the overall suspension system could have been better tuned, in other words, not giving you that sort of jittery feeling, specifically when you're going over bumpier terrain. Now, nonetheless, the X-Trail is a worthwhile consideration in comparison to some of the alternatives out there on the market, and we'd be curious to know what you make of it down in the comment section below. Now, if you've liked this independent detailed review and want to see more from the channel, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.